Billionaire hers dead. Fiancée's voice on business. Call after 15 years. The truth destroys him. The video conference froze on a pair of brown eyes behind designer glasses, eyes Callum Brennan had seen every night in his nightmares for 15 years. His anonymous business partner, the consulting genius who'd helped build his empire, reached up to adjust her camera. Her sleeve slipped back, revealing a small scar on her wrist, the exact scar he'd kissed 1,000 times. Sarah Norman wasn't dead. She'd been watching him all along. Callum sat motionless in his Chicago penthouse office, the city lights blurring beyond floor-to-ceiling windows as his mind refused to process what his eyes had just registered. The digital clock read 12:47 a.m. He'd been on this video call for nearly 2 hours with S. Norman Consulting, the anonymous partner whose insights had helped transform Brennan Technologies from a promising startup into a multi-billion-dollar empire. For 8 years, he'd worked with this consultant. 8 years of video calls where the camera angle never quite captured a full face. 8 years of brilliant strategies delivered in a professional voice that he'd convinced himself only sounded familiar because he wanted to hear ghosts. 8 years of telling himself grief did strange things to memory. But that scar, that impossible, undeniable scar. His hand moved toward the screen of its own accord, fingers trembling as they traced empty air where her image had been. The call had disconnected abruptly, leaving him staring at his own reflection, a man of 43 who looked suddenly ancient, stormy gray eyes wide with something between hope and horror. The scar had appeared during a cooking accident in his old apartment. Sarah had been 28, laughing as she tried to teach him her grandmother's gumbo recipe. The knife had slipped, cutting deep across her left wrist. He remembered his panic, the way she'd stayed calm even as blood dripped onto worn linoleum. He'd driven her to the emergency room with his heart in his throat, convinced he was going to lose her over something as stupid as onions and kitchen knives. Later, after the stitches, she'd caught him staring at the wound with guilt written across his face. "It's just a scar, Callum," she'd said softly, placing his hand over the bandage. "Battle wounds from trying to civilize you." On the night he'd proposed, 3 months after the accident, he'd kissed that scar, pressed his lips to the thin white line, and promised to spend his life protecting her from anything that could cause her pain. She'd cried, said yes, and they'd made love until dawn painted gold across her brown skin. 2 months later, she was gone. The memory crashed through him with physical force, stealing his breath. Sarah at 29, radiant in early morning light, her natural hair spread across his pillow like a crown. Sarah laughing at his terrible jokes. Sarah fierce and passionate during arguments about everything from politics to pizza toppings. Sarah soft and vulnerable in his arms, whispering her fears about whether the world would accept them, whether his investors would balk at his choice of a black woman as his partner in life and business. He'd told her the world could go to hell. He'd meant it. But the world had other plans. Callum's hands clenched into fists on his desk, knuckles going white. His phone buzzed insistently. He'd been ignoring calls since the moment he'd seen that scar. The office door opened without warning. "Callum?" Aaron Firth's voice carried concern and frustration. "I've been calling you for 20 minutes. What the hell's going on?" Callum turned slowly to face his best friend and chief operating officer. Aaron stood in the doorway in jeans and a Brennan Technologies polo, his comfortable solidity the mark of a man who'd built a good life and knew how to protect it. At 44, he'd been Callum's anchor through the darkest years. They'd been friends since college. Aaron had been the best man at what would have been Callum and Sarah's wedding. He'd identified her body after the car went into the Chicago River. He'd stood beside Callum at the funeral, steadying him when his legs gave out during the eulogy. "I think I'm losing my mind," Callum said finally, his voice rough. "I just saw something impossible." Aaron crossed the office in 3 strides, his expression shifting to focused concern. "What kind of impossible?" "The kind where dead people come back to life." The words tasted like madness. He gestured toward his dark screen. "My consulting partner, S. Norman. I saw her wrist. There was a scar." "Lots of people have scars, man." Aaron's tone was gentle, the voice of someone talking down a person from a ledge. "You've been working too hard. When's the last time you slept more than 4 hours? It wasn't just any scar. Callum stood abruptly, pacing to the glass. Below, Chicago sprawled in midnight glory. Millions of lights, millions of lives, millions of people who weren't haunted by ghosts that turned out to be flesh and blood. It was her scar, Sarah's scar. From that night we tried to make gumbo. The silence stretched too long. When Aaron finally spoke, his voice was careful. Callum, Sarah died 15 years ago. We buried her. You gave the eulogy, remember? I remember. Callum turned back to face his friend. I remember every word. I remember how her mother collapsed against me, sobbing. I remember her sister Doris standing like a statue, not crying, just staring at the casket. I remember all of it, Aaron, every terrible, soul-destroying moment. Then you know she's gone. Aaron moved closer, lowering his voice. And I know how much that still hurts. But you've built something incredible here. Brennan Technologies is about to close the biggest deal in company history. Rosie needs you present and focused. You can't let grief drag you back into the dark. At the mention of his daughter, Callum felt some of the wildness recede. Rosie, 14 years old, sleeping upstairs, probably with earbuds in and her sketchbook open beside her. She'd inherited her mother's artistic talent and her father's stubborn determination. She was the reason he'd pulled himself out of the abyss after Sarah died. Rosie had been born 14 months after Sarah's death, the product of a brief relationship with a woman named Jennifer, who'd left when Rosie was 2, unable to handle the demands of motherhood or Callum's obvious emotional unavailability. He'd raised his daughter mostly alone, with Aaron's family providing the stability and warmth that a grieving, workaholic single father struggled to supply. You're right, Callum said finally, though the words felt like lies. I'm seeing things that aren't there. I need sleep. But even as he spoke, his fingers itched to search for S. Norman Consulting, to dig into every piece of information about the anonymous consultant who'd helped shape his company's strategy for the past 8 years. 8 years. He'd started working with S. Norman 7 years after Sarah's death. The timing felt significant. After Aaron left, Callum stood alone in his office, surrounded by monuments to his success, awards on shelves, photos of product launches and industry galas, a framed magazine cover calling him the reluctant billionaire who revolutionized AI integration. And in the center of it all, in a frame he should have retired years ago but couldn't, a photo of Sarah, not from their engagement, not from some carefully staged moment, just Sarah on a random Tuesday, caught mid-laugh by his amateur photography, her eyes sparkling with mischief and joy. He picked up the frame now, studying her face. Same eyes, though these were younger, unguarded by designer glasses. Same curve to her mouth when she smiled. Same graceful hands, though in this photo they bore no scars. "Are you out there?" he whispered to the photograph, hope blooming painful in his chest. "Did you leave me, Sarah? Or did someone take you away?" The photograph offered no answers. It never did. Across the Atlantic, in a Paris apartment overlooking the Seine, Sarah Norman stood at her window with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The city lights reflected off the dark water below, beautiful and indifferent to human suffering. She'd lived in Paris for 12 years now, after spending the first 3 years after her death, moving between London, Berlin, and Brussels, always running, always hiding, always looking over her shoulder. Her laptop sat closed on the desk behind her, as if shutting it could undo what had happened, as if she could take back the moment when the technical glitch had shifted her camera angle, revealing not just her face but the scar on her wrist, the scar she usually kept hidden beneath long sleeves or carefully positioned jewelry. She'd seen the recognition in Callum's eyes in the half-second before she'd killed the connection. Watched the color drain from his face. Seen his hand reach toward the screen with that same unconscious gesture he'd made 1,000 times when they were together, reaching for her like she was the sun and he needed her light to survive. 15 years. She'd spent 15 years watching him from the shadows, helping build his company into everything she'd known it could become, telling herself it was enough to see him succeed, even if he could never know she was there. 15 years of disciplining herself not to reach back through the screen, not to let her professional mask slip, not to give in to the desperate need to hear him say her name just once more. And now it was over. He knew, or at least suspected, and everything she'd sacrificed was about to come crashing down. Her phone buzzed. She knew who it would be. Doris. He saw you. Sarah's younger sister. The only person in the world who knew the truth. The only one who'd carried the terrible burden of Sarah's secret, lying to their mother until the day she died 5 years ago, managing the guilt of watching Callum's public grief while knowing her sister was alive and broken and convinced she'd done the right thing. Sarah typed back with trembling fingers. Yes, it's over. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally. Good. It's been 15 years, Sarah. Maybe it's time. Time for what? Sarah wanted to scream. Time to destroy him all over again. Time to prove she'd been selfish, that she'd caused all that pain for nothing. Time to face the reality that he'd built a life without her. A life that included a daughter she'd learned about 3 years ago. A beautiful girl named Rosie who looked at her father with adoration and deserved stability that Sarah's reappearance would shatter. Instead, she typed, I need to call Eleanor. Be safe, came Doris's response. I love you. I love you too. Eleanor Hammond answered on the second ring, her voice crisp despite the late hour. I wondered when you'd call. How did you know? Sarah moved away from the window, pacing her apartment. It was decorated with the careful neutrality of someone who'd never quite committed to any place being home. Expensive furniture that could have been anywhere. Art on the walls that she admired but didn't love. Nothing personal except for a single photograph tucked in her bedroom drawer. Callum and her from the night he proposed, his arms around her waist, both laughing at something long forgotten. Because you've been running for 15 years, my dear, and I've been waiting for the moment when you'd finally have to stop. Eleanor had been Sarah's favorite professor at Sorbonne, the woman who'd seen potential in a driven American graduate student and become first a mentor, then a friend. She'd also been the one to help Sarah disappear when the threats became impossible to ignore. He saw my scar. Sarah sank onto her couch, pulling her knees to her chest. I got careless with the camera angle. He looked at me like he'd seen a soul, ghost, which I suppose he had. And now? Now I don't know. Sarah pressed her free hand over her eyes, exhaustion crashing through her in waves. I've spent 15 years building S. Norman Consulting into one of the most respected firms in the business. I've made a life here, Eleanor. Not the life I wanted, but a life. And he, her voice broke. He built Brennan Technologies into everything I knew it could be. He's raised a daughter. He's moved on. What right do I have to walk back into his world and destroy the peace he's found? You give yourself too little credit and him too much, Eleanor said with blunt honesty. You didn't just help shape those companies' strategies, Sarah. You helped shape his. For 8 years, you've been his invisible partner. You never truly left him. That's different. Is it? You've been watching over him like a guardian angel for 15 years. Perhaps it's time to consider that he deserves the truth, no matter how painful. And perhaps you deserve to stop punishing yourself for a choice you made under impossible circumstances. Sarah thought about those circumstances now. The threatening calls that had started 3 months into her engagement. The concerned investors who'd made it clear that Callum's relationship with a black woman was going to be a problem for funding. The explicit warnings that her presence was going to cost him everything he'd worked for. The final confrontation where she'd been told in no uncertain terms that if she truly loved him, she'd remove herself from his life before she destroyed it. She'd tried to talk to him about it. But Callum had been young and idealistic, convinced that love and merit would triumph over prejudice. He'd told her they'd fight together, that he didn't care what it cost him, that she was worth everything. And that was exactly what she'd been afraid of, that he'd sacrifice his dreams for her and then spend the rest of his life resenting what he'd lost. So she'd made the choice for both of them, staged the car accident with Eleanor's help, created a closed casket funeral with a body that wasn't hers. Let Callum grieve, and eventually, she'd hoped, forget her. Except he hadn't forgotten. She'd watched from afar as he built his empire with her ghost as his motivation. And when she couldn't bear the distance anymore, when watching wasn't enough, she'd created S. Norman Consulting and reached out to Brennan Technologies. She told herself it was purely professional, that she just wanted to help him succeed. She'd been lying to herself for 8 years. I can't see him, Eleanor. If he figures out who I really am, it will destroy everything. His daughter, his company, his peace. His daughter is 14 and sharp as a tack. His company is strong enough to survive truth. And his peace. Eleanor's laugh was gentle but knowing. My dear, I've seen the interviews. Callum Brennan is many things, but at peace is not one of them. He's been a man going through motions. The question isn't whether you'll disturb his peace. The question is whether you'll finally give him the truth he deserves. After they hung up, Sarah sat in the darkness and allowed herself to do something she rarely permitted. She opened her laptop, navigated to the hidden folder containing every video call she'd saved from her sessions with Callum over the past 8 years. She clicked on one at random. Callum, at 37, discussing a potential acquisition with passion animating his features. His hair had just started showing gray at the temples. She'd wanted to reach through the screen and touch those silver strands to kiss away the stress lines around his stormy eyes. Another video. Callum at 40, laughing at something she'd said. His laugh had changed over the years, become deeper, more guarded. But in that moment, for just seconds, she'd heard echoes of the young man who'd proposed in his tiny apartment with a ring he'd saved 6 months to buy. Another. Callum at 42, tired after a difficult board meeting. He'd confided in her that night about the loneliness of leadership. She'd wanted so badly to comfort him, to tell him he was doing brilliantly, that he was exactly the man she'd always believed he could be. He'd looked directly at the camera then and said something that had haunted her. Sometimes I feel like I'm talking to someone who actually knows me. Not the CEO, not the public figure, just me. Does that sound crazy? She'd forced herself to laugh it off, to make a joke about good consultants being trained therapists, but her hands had shaken for an hour afterward. Now she watched that moment again, seeing what she'd refused to acknowledge, the way his eyes had held hers through the screen, the way his voice had softened, the way he'd leaned forward unconsciously as if proximity to a camera could bring him closer to the woman on the other end. He'd known. On some level, perhaps not consciously, he'd known all along. Her phone buzzed again. This time, an unknown number. Her heart slammed against her ribs as she answered. S. Norman Consulting. Her voice came out steady, professional, years of practice hiding tremors. I know who you are. Callum's voice hit her like a physical blow, rough with emotion, thick with 15 years of grief and rage and something that might have been hope. I need you to tell me I'm not insane. I need you to tell me that was really your scar I saw. I need... His voice broke. Sarah, please, if you're alive, if you're out there, just tell me. Every instinct screamed at her to hang up, to disappear again. But Eleanor's words echoed. He deserves the truth. And beneath that, quieter but insistent, I can't run anymore. I can't do this over the phone, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Not like this. Then tell me where you are. I'll be on the next plane. Sarah, please. The International Tech Summit. The words came out before she could stop them. In New York, 2 weeks. Was already planning to attend. You'll be there? His voice held desperate hope that made her heart break. You'll talk to me? Face to face? She closed her eyes, made the choice that would change everything. Yes, I'll be there. Promise me. Promise me you won't disappear again before I can see you. I promise. And then, because she couldn't help herself, because it had been 15 years and she was so tired of hiding. Callum? Yes? The word was barely more than a breath. I never stopped. She caught herself, swallowed the confession. I never stopped watching your company's progress. You've done remarkable things. Silence stretched between them, filled with everything they couldn't say. Then, softly, I thought I felt you sometimes. In the strategies, the insights. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was seeing her in everything because I couldn't let go. But it was really you, wasn't it? You've been there all along. I should go. Her voice was thick with tears. 2 weeks. New York. Don't make me wait longer than that, Sarah. I don't think I could survive it. After the call ended, Sarah sat motionless in the dark, the weight of what she'd just agreed to crushing down on her chest. 2 weeks until she faced the man she'd loved enough to die for. 2 weeks until everything she'd built came crashing down. 2 weeks until she had to look Callum Brennan in the eyes and explain why she'd let him grieve for a ghost. The next morning, Callum stood at his office window watching his city wake beneath him. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that scar, heard Sarah's voice, felt the impossible hope and terror warring in his chest. "Dad?" Rosie's voice came from the doorway. She was dressed for school in ripped jeans and an oversized hoodie, her natural curls pulled into a high puff. Her brown eyes, so much like her mother Jennifer's, studied him with the unnerving perception of teenagers who'd learned to read their parents' moods. "You okay? Aaron said you worked all night again." Callum turned from the window, summoning a smile he didn't feel. "Just some complicated business deals. Nothing for you to worry about." Rosie crossed her arms, unconvinced. She'd inherited his stubborn determination, along with Jennifer's artistic soul, and the combination made her formidable despite her 14 years. "You have that look, the one you get when you're thinking about something you won't talk about." "What look is that?" "The one where you're here, but not really here." She moved into the office, picking up the photo of Sarah from his desk. She'd asked about it once when she was 10, and he'd given her the sanitized version, someone important from before she was born, someone who was gone now. Rosie had studied the photo with serious eyes and asked if that was why he sometimes looked sad, even when he was smiling. He'd hugged her tight and told her she was too smart for her own good. Now she looked at the photo again, then at him. "Aaron said something weird happened with your consultant last night, that you thought you saw something. Aaron talks too much." But there was no heat in the words. Aaron and his wife Michelle had been instrumental in helping him raise Rosie. If Aaron had expressed concern to his goddaughter, it came from love. "Are you going to tell me what's going on?" Rosie set the photo down carefully. "Or are we doing the thing where you pretend everything's fine until it's not anymore?" The accuracy of that observation hit him squarely in the chest. He'd been guilty of that pattern throughout Rosie's life, maintaining the facade of control until circumstances forced honesty. Like when Jennifer left and he'd tried to pretend for 3 months that Mommy was just on a trip. Like when the company almost collapsed during the recession and he'd hidden his stress until Rosie found him having a panic attack at 2 in the morning. He'd promised her after that incident that he'd try to be more open. A promise he'd mostly kept, though his instinct was still to protect her from anything that might cause her pain. But this, how could he explain something he barely understood himself? "I might have found someone I thought I'd lost," he said carefully, sitting on the edge of his desk so they were closer to eye level. "Someone from before you were born. Someone important." Rosie's eyes flickered to the photograph, then back to his face. "The woman in the picture?" His silence was answer enough. "But she's dead." Rosie's voice held confusion rather than accusation. "You told me she died in an accident." "I thought she did." Callum rubbed his face, exhaustion making words difficult. "Everyone thought she did, but last night I saw something that made me think maybe I was wrong. Maybe we were all wrong." Rosie processed this with serious consideration. She'd grown up with an unconventional family structure, learning early that life didn't always follow neat patterns. "And if you weren't wrong, if she's alive somewhere, then everything I thought I knew about the last 15 years is a lie." The words came out more bitter than he'd intended. "And I have about 1,000 questions about why she let me believe she was dead." Understanding dawned in Rosie's expression. At 14, she was old enough to grasp the enormity of that kind of betrayal, young enough to still believe in the possibility of good reasons for impossible choices. Maybe she had a reason. A good one. Maybe. Callum wanted to believe that, needed to believe it. "I'm going to find out in 2 weeks in New York." "You're going to see her?" Rosie's eyes widened. "For real? If she keeps her promise, if she doesn't disappear again." The fear that she might run had been gnawing at him. "Rosie, I need you to understand something. This doesn't change anything about us, about our life. You're the most important person in my world. Whatever happens with this woman, her name's Sarah, right?" Rosie interrupted gently. "You can say her name, Dad. I'm not going to break." Sarah. The name felt like coming home and losing himself all at once. "Whatever happens with Sarah, you come first. Always." Rosie hugged him then, fierce and quick in the way of teenagers who were too cool for extended displays but still needed reassurance. I know, Dad. And for what it's worth, I hope she shows up. I hope she has a really good explanation, because nobody who makes you look like that, all hopeful and terrified at the same time, nobody like that should stay gone if they don't have to. Have you ever hidden the truth from someone you loved because you thought it would protect them, only to wonder if you made the right choice? Tell me your story in the comments, let me know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe if you're already invested in Callum and Sarah's impossible reunion. Chapter 2. The next 13 days passed in a blur of forced normalcy. Callum went through the motions of running his company, but his mind was always elsewhere, counting down hours until he'd finally see Sarah face to face. On day 7, Aaron cornered him. I know something's going on with you and the Norman consultant. Want to tell me what it is? Callum debated deflecting, but decided his best friend deserved honesty. I think S. Norman is Sarah. Aaron's expression cycled through disbelief, concern, and something that looked like fear. Callum, that's not possible. We buried her. I identified her body. Did you? Callum challenged quietly. Or did you identify a body that the police told you was hers? Closed casket, remember? Because of the damage from the accident. Aaron sank into the chair, the color draining from his face. You're serious? You really think... I saw her scar, Aaron. The one from when we were making gumbo. I talked to her on the phone. She's going to meet me in New York. Callum showed him the screenshot he'd captured. Look at her. Really look. Aaron studied the image for a long moment. Finally, he looked up. If this is her, if Sarah Norman is really alive and has been hiding for 15 years, you need to ask yourself some hard questions before you see her. Like what? Like why she'd do this to you, to all of us. Her mother died believing her daughter was dead, Callum. What kind of person does that unless the reason is... Aaron stopped himself, choosing words carefully. You need to be prepared for the possibility that maybe she left because she wanted to. That maybe we weren't enough. The words landed like physical blows because Callum had been thinking the same thing in his darkest moments. She said she'd explain, in New York. And if her explanation isn't good enough? Aaron's voice was gentle but firm. You've built something good here. You've got Rosie. You've got the company. You've got some semblance of peace. Don't let a ghost destroy that. She's not a ghost anymore, Callum said quietly. That's the problem. 3 days before New York, Callum received a package via courier. No return address, just his name written in handwriting he recognized from old love letters. Inside was a flash drive. He plugged it into his computer with trembling hands. One file, labeled simply Context. A video began playing. Sarah looking into a camera with exhaustion and determination. This wasn't the professional consultant. This was something raw, more real. Callum. Her voice filled his office. I'm sending this because you deserve some context before New York. Not excuses. I know there aren't words that will make this right, but context at least. She took a breath, steadied herself. 3 months after you proposed, I started getting calls. Anonymous at first, then increasingly specific. Investors in Brennan Technologies telling me that your relationship with me was going to cost the company funding, that they couldn't support a CEO who was married to someone like me. Their words, not mine. That your future was going to be destroyed by your insistence on choosing me over your career. Callum's hands clenched into fists. He remembered Sarah trying to tell him about pressure she was facing. He'd dismissed it, told her it was just noise, that anyone who had a problem with them could take their money elsewhere. He'd been so sure love and principle would win. I tried to talk to you about it, Sarah continued, but you were so certain we could fight through anything. And maybe we could have, Callum. But they didn't just threaten me. They threatened you, your company, your future, everything you'd worked for since you were 18 years old. She paused, brushing away tears. The final conversation happened at a coffee shop in downtown Chicago. 3 of your major investors, all very polite, all very clear. They said if I married you, they'd pull their funding. Said they'd make sure other investors knew about your poor judgment. Said they'd systematically dismantle everything you'd built. And they could have done it, Callum. They had the power, the connections. Callum felt sick. He knew which investors she meant. He'd had to buy them out 2 years after her death. He'd never known why they held such animosity. Now he did. "I told myself I was protecting you," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "That if I disappeared, you'd be free to build the company you deserved without me as an anchor. That you'd grieve, yes, but then you'd move on. You'd find someone the world would accept. And I told myself that loving you meant letting you go." She wiped her eyes, squared her shoulders. "Eleanor helped me stage the accident. There was a Jane Doe from a fire, beyond visual identification. We made sure the evidence supported the story, made sure there'd be no reason for you to question it." The video showed her standing, pacing. "I watched your eulogy online, heard every word you said about me, about us, about the future we should have had, and I wanted to die for real, Callum. But I didn't, because Eleanor convinced me that if I'd sacrificed everything for you to succeed, the least I could do was stay alive to see it happen." She sat back down, looking directly into the camera. Norman Consulting started 7 years after I disappeared. I couldn't stay away completely. I needed to know you were okay, needed to help in the only way I could without revealing myself. And when your company started working with mine, when I heard your voice again, I knew I should cut the connection, should disappear from your life again. A sad smile crossed her face. But I didn't. I kept taking your calls, kept helping with strategies, kept finding excuses to talk to you just one more time. I told myself it was professional, but the truth is I was selfish. I couldn't let go completely. She leaned forward, her eyes intense. "In 3 days, we'll see each other face to face, and you'll have every right to hate me for what I did. But I need you to know that I never stopped loving you, Callum. Not for a single day in 15 years. And if I could go back and choose differently, if I could have trusted that we were strong enough to fight those threats together, I would, in a heartbeat." The video ended, leaving Callum staring at a black screen with tears streaming down his face. Rage and grief and understanding warred in his chest. She'd been trying to protect him, he could see that now. But she'd made the choice without him, had decided unilaterally that she knew what was best. And the cruelest irony was that her sacrifice had worked. Brennan Technologies had thrived. He'd built exactly the empire she'd given up everything to protect. But at what cost? The International Tech Summit opened on a Thursday in late spring, and Callum arrived in New York feeling like he was walking toward either salvation or destruction. Rosie had insisted on coming with him, claiming she wanted to see the city, though he suspected she really wanted to make sure he was okay. "You nervous?" she asked as they checked into the hotel. "Terrified," he admitted. "Good, that means it matters." She hugged him quickly. "I'm going to the art museum while you do your business thing. Call me if you need me, okay?" The summit was being held at a massive convention center. Callum had been scheduled to give a talk on AI integration, but he could barely remember what he was supposed to say. His mind was entirely focused on finding Sarah in the crowds. He didn't have to look long. She was standing near the registration desk, dressed in elegant business attire that managed to be both professional and striking. Her natural hair was styled in the 2-strand twists he'd seen on video, pulled back to reveal the graceful line of her neck. Designer glasses framed warm brown eyes currently focused on her phone. She looked older than the woman in his memories, more polished, more confident, but undeniably, impossibly her. Callum's feet carried him forward. He stopped 3 feet away, close, enough to see her clearly, but not so close as to crowd her. Sarah looked up from her phone. Their eyes met. The world narrowed to just the two of them, the noise of the convention center fading to white noise. "Hi," she said softly. Just one word, but it carried 15 years of grief and hope and fear. "Hi," he managed back. His hands itched to reach for her, to confirm through touch that she was solid and real and here, but he kept them at his sides. "You came. I promised I would." She pocketed her phone, and he noticed her hands were shaking slightly. "Should we? There's a coffee shop on the 2nd floor. It should be quieter." They walked to the elevator in silence, hyper-aware of each other's proximity. In the enclosed space, Callum caught her scent, something different than what she used to wear, more sophisticated, but with an underlying note that triggered memories of lazy Sunday mornings and whispered promises in the dark. The coffee shop was mercifully empty. They found a table in the corner, ordered drinks neither of them would touch, and then sat across from each other with the weight of 15 years between them. "I don't know where to start," Sarah admitted. "I've rehearsed this conversation 1,000 times, and now that you're here, everything I planned to say seems inadequate." "Your video helped." Callum kept his voice even, though his pulse was hammering. "Understanding why you left. But Sarah, you should have trusted me. We should have fought those threats together. You were 28 years old with a startup that was barely profitable. They could have destroyed everything you'd worked for." Her eyes held anguish. "I couldn't let that happen. So instead you destroyed us." The words came out harsher than he'd intended, but he couldn't take them back. "You let me believe you were dead, Sarah. I spoke at your funeral. I held your mother while she sobbed. I spent 15 years building a company to honor your memory, and all that time you were alive, watching. How is that better than fighting together?" Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she didn't look away. "It's not better. It was just the only choice I could see at the time. And by the time I realized I might have been wrong, it had been too long. How do you come back from death, Callum? You do what you're doing right now. You show up and tell the truth." He leaned forward, finally allowing himself to really look at her. The fine lines at the corners of her eyes, the way her mouth still curved slightly when she was nervous, the graceful hands he'd dreamed about for 15 years. "I'm angry at you. I'm hurt and furious, and I don't know if I can forgive what you did. But I'm also—" He stopped himself, but she finished the thought. "Still in love with me? I don't know." The lie tasted bitter. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm in love with the memory of who we were. I don't know who you are anymore, Sarah. I don't know who you are either." She smiled sadly. "We're different people now, shaped by 15 years and choices we can't undo. Maybe the version of us that could have worked died in that river after all." The possibility felt like a knife to the chest, but Callum forced himself to consider it. "Or maybe we get to decide who we are now. Together this time." Hope flickered in her eyes. "You'd want that? After everything?" "I want to understand you. The you sitting across from me, not the ghost I've been mourning. And I want you to know who I've become. The good and the bad." He thought about Rosie. "I have a daughter, Rosie. She's 14, brilliant, and terrifying. She knows about you, about the woman in the photo on my desk. She doesn't know yet that you're alive." Sarah's expression crumpled. "A daughter? Of course you do. You'd be an amazing father." "Her mother left when she was 2. I've raised her mostly alone, with help from Aaron and his family." He watched Sarah absorb this, saw her understanding that his life had moved forward in concrete, irreversible ways. "She's my world, Sarah. Whatever happens between us, she comes first. I would never expect anything else." Sarah reached across the table, stopped just short of touching his hand. "Can I ask, what's she like?" So he told her. About Rosie's artistic talent and sharp wit, about her struggles with identity and belonging, about the way she'd handled her mother's absence with resilience that still amazed him. And as he talked, Sarah listened with an intensity that reminded him of why he'd fallen in love with her in the first place. She asked questions that showed real interest. She laughed at his stories. She looked at him like he was the most fascinating person in the world. "She sounds incredible," Sarah said when he finished. "You've built a beautiful life, Callum, even if it's not the one we planned. Tell me about yours." He wanted to know everything. "Paris, the consulting firm, who you've become." Sarah talked about her years in hiding, the early terror of being discovered, the slow process of building S. Norman Consulting into something legitimate and respected. The languages she'd learned, the cultures she'd immersed herself in. She talked about loneliness, about watching his interviews online, about the day she'd learned about Rosie, and the complex grief of knowing he'd built a family without her, about her sister Doris carrying the weight of the secret, about their mother dying without knowing her daughter was alive. "I can't forgive myself for that," she admitted, voice breaking. Mama died thinking I was gone, and Doris had to bury her alone. That's not something I can make right. But you can stop making it worse. Callum finally closed the distance between them, his hand covering hers on the table. The contact sent electricity through his body, familiar and foreign all at once. You can stop hiding. You can let the people who love you know you're alive. She turned her hand over, lacing their fingers together. The touch felt like coming home and stepping into unknown territory simultaneously. I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to be Sarah Norman again. I've been someone else for so long. Then be both. He squeezed her hand gently. Be the woman who built an empire from nothing. Be the brilliant consultant who sees patterns no one else does. Be the person who made an impossible choice for what she believed were the right reasons. Just be her honestly, without hiding. They sat like that for a long moment, hands linked across the table, both aware that they were at a crossroads. They could walk away now, chalk this up to closure, and move on with separate lives. Or they could choose the harder path, the one that meant confronting 15 years of pain and loss and growth, trying to build something new from the ruins of what they'd been. I have a panel in an hour, Sarah said reluctantly, and you have your keynote. I don't care about the keynote. The truth of it surprised him. But you should go to your panel. People are expecting S. Norman. Will you be there? Her eyes held hope and vulnerability. Or is this goodbye? This isn't goodbye. The certainty in his voice surprised them both. Tonight, have dinner with me. No summit, no crowds, just us actually talking. Okay, she smiled, tentatively but genuinely. There's a restaurant, Le Bernardin. I used to dream about taking you there someday. Le Bernardin, he agreed. 8 o'clock? They stood, releasing hands reluctantly. Before Sarah could step away, Callum stopped her with a gentle touch on her arm. One more thing. The scar. You kept it all these years. You could have had it removed. She looked down at the thin white line on her wrist. It was the only piece of us I had left. I couldn't give it up too. After she left, Callum stood in the empty coffee shop and did something he hadn't done since the day they'd lowered Sarah's casket into the ground. He cried, not from grief this time, but from the overwhelming complexity of feeling too many things at once. Relief that she was alive, rage at the years stolen from them, fear that they'd grown too far apart to bridge the distance, and underneath it all, that stubborn flame of love that had refused to die. His phone buzzed. Rosie. How did it go? He typed back. It's complicated. Are you okay? Rosie. Museums are awesome. You? Not sure yet, he admitted. Dinner tonight with her, just us. Rosie sent back encouraging emojis followed by, Don't mess it up, Dad. He laughed despite everything, his 14-year-old daughter giving him relationship advice about a woman who'd been dead for most of Rosie's life. Aaron called next. Well? She's alive. It's really her. Callum started walking toward the exit, suddenly needing air. Everything in her video was true. Investors threatened her, threatened the company. She thought she was protecting me by disappearing. And now? Now I don't know. We're having dinner tonight, trying to figure out if there's anything left to build from. Aaron was quiet for a moment. For what it's worth, I hope there is. I hope you get the happy ending you both deserved 15 years ago. But Callum, be careful. Guard your heart a little bit, just in case. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Callum delivered his keynote on autopilot. He caught glimpses of Sarah throughout the day. Once across a crowded exhibition hall where their eyes met and held for a suspended moment before the crowd swallowed her again. Another time passing in a corridor, close enough that her perfume reached him, triggering memories so vivid he had to stop and steady himself against a wall. Each time, the pull between them felt magnetic, undeniable. Whatever they'd been, whatever they'd lost, the fundamental chemistry remained intact. At 7:30, Callum stood in his hotel room adjusting his tie for the third time. He'd chosen clothing carefully, a dark suit that fit well, a shirt in deep charcoal that Sarah had once said brought out his eyes. He felt ridiculous, like a teenager preparing for prom rather than a 43-year-old man meeting the ghost of his past for dinner. His phone chimed. Sarah. I'm in the lobby. No pressure, but I've been ready since 6. The admission made him smile. She was as nervous as he was. When he stepped out of the elevator, she was standing by the windows overlooking the city, backlit by the glow of Manhattan at night. She'd changed into a dress that was elegant without being formal, deep plum fabric that complemented her skin tone. Her hair was down now, the two-strand twists loose and beautiful around her face. She turned as he approached, and the smile that lit her features made his chest ache with nostalgia and new possibility simultaneously. "You look beautiful," he said. "You don't look so bad yourself." Her eyes traced over him appreciatively. "Though you've gone a bit gray since I last saw you up close. Running a billion-dollar company will do that." He offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. The touch was electric. "Ready?" No," she admitted as they walked toward the exit. "But let's go anyway." The restaurant was intimate and quiet, with soft lighting and tables spaced far enough apart for privacy. Wine was poured, menus consulted and set aside without either of them really reading the options. "This is surreal," Sarah said, fingers tracing the stem of her wine glass. "Sitting across from you, after all this time. Tell me about Paris." Callum wanted to know everything about the life she'd built without him. So she told him. About her apartment overlooking the Seine, about early mornings at cafes, about museums and galleries she'd visited alone, wishing she had someone to share them with. "I have a small circle of friends," she admitted, "but I keep them at arm's length. Can't let anyone get too close, can't risk them discovering that Sarah Norman isn't supposed to exist. It's a lonely way to live." "Then why keep living it?" Callum leaned forward. "Once you'd been gone a few years, once I'd moved on, why not come back?" "Because I was a coward." The admission came out flat and honest, and because the longer I stayed away, the harder it was to imagine coming back. "How do you explain years of deception?" "I never found peace," he told her. "I found purpose. I found ways to fill the emptiness, but peace, that died with you, Sarah, or what I thought was your death." Their food arrived, but neither paid it much attention. They were too focused on each other, on trying to bridge 15 years with words and honesty. Callum told her about the early years after her death, the depression that had nearly consumed him, the night he'd met Jennifer, a brief connection based more on mutual loneliness than love, which had resulted in Rosie, the best thing that had ever happened to him. "I tried to love Jennifer," he admitted, "tried to build something real with her, but I couldn't. I was still too wrapped up in you, and she knew it. That's why she left. She said she couldn't compete with a ghost." Sarah reached across the table, taking his hand. "I'm sorry. For all of it. For the pain I caused. For the years we lost. But you can't go back." He threaded their fingers together, holding tight. "None of us can. We can only deal with what's in front of us now." "And what is in front of us?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. Before Callum could answer, his phone buzzed insistently. He glanced at the screen, saw Aaron's name, and almost ignored it. But Aaron wouldn't call during dinner unless it was urgent. "I'm sorry," he said to Sarah, answering quickly. "Aaron, what's wrong? Have you seen the news?" Aaron's voice was tight with stress. "Someone leaked information about S. Norman Consulting. There's speculation online that the consultant is connected to you personally. There might be a conflict of interest." Callum's blood went cold. How much do they know? Right now. Just enough to raise questions. But there's a journalist digging deeper. Trevor Hoffman. If he starts connecting dots, if he figures out who S. Norman really is, it's going to explode, Callum finished grimly. He looked across the table at Sarah, saw understanding dawn in her eyes. "How long do we have?" "Maybe a few days, maybe less." Aaron paused. "I'm sorry, man. I know this is the worst possible timing." After he hung up, Callum relayed the situation to Sarah, watching her face cycle through shock, fear, and resignation. "So it's over," she said flatly. "The hiding. My carefully constructed life. All of it's about to come crashing down." Maybe that's not a bad thing. The words surprised him. "Maybe it's time to stop running, Sarah. Time to face this head on." Easy for you to say. You're not the one who faked your death and lied to everyone for 15 years. But beneath the bitterness, he heard fear. If this gets out, the fallout will be massive. "Will have. To deal with the truth," Callum interrupted firmly. And yeah, it's going to be messy and complicated and probably painful. But hiding hasn't worked. Sarah pulled her hand back, wrapping her arms around herself. You don't understand what you're asking. If I come forward, I don't just lose my business. I lose everything. You never had a normal life. The words came out harder than he'd intended. You've been living in hiding for 15 years, watching the world from shadows. That's not living. That's just existing. It's all I have, her voice broke. It's all I've had since the day I left you. Callum moved around the table, sliding into the booth beside her. He took her face in his hands, making her look at him. Then take something new. Take a chance on truth, on building something real instead of hiding. What if I can't? Tears streamed down her face. What if the truth destroys everything anyway? Then we face that together. He wiped her tears with his thumbs. No more unilateral decisions, Sarah. No more you deciding what's best for both of us. We're in this together now, or we're not in it at all. She looked at him for a long moment, searching his face. Then, slowly, she leaned forward until their foreheads touched. I'm terrified, she whispered. Me too. He breathed her in, memorizing this moment. But I'm also tired of being apart. 15 years was long enough, don't you think? The kiss happened without either of them quite deciding to make it happen. One moment they were touching foreheads, sharing breath and space and fear. The next, their lips met in a collision of 15 years' worth of longing and grief and stubborn, desperate love. It wasn't gentle. There was too much pain, too much history for gentleness. Callum kissed her like he was trying to confirm she was real, his hands moving from her face to her hair, tangling in the twists he'd memorized through video screens. Sarah kissed him back with equal intensity, her fingers digging into his shoulders like she was afraid he'd disappear if she let go. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, staring at each other with a mixture of wonder and terror. That was, Sarah started. Necessary, Callum finished, overdue by about 15 years. A laugh escaped her, watery but genuine. What do we do now? Now we figure this out. Together. He took her hand, raised it to his lips to kiss the scar on her wrist. The gesture made her breath catch. No more hiding, Sarah. No more running. Whatever happens with this journalist, whatever fallout comes, we face it head on. You keep saying we like it's simple, but she didn't pull her hand away. Callum, you have a daughter to protect, a company with thousands of employees. You can't just... What I can't do is walk away from you again, he interrupted. I lost you once. I'm not willing to do it a second time, regardless of what it costs. Chapter 3. They left the restaurant without finishing their meals, walking the New York streets with hands linked, both aware that the clock was ticking on their privacy. Within days, possibly hours, the world would know that Sarah Norman was alive. I should meet her, Sarah said as they walked. Rosie, before everything explodes. If we're doing this, she deserves to know who I am before reading about it online. The suggestion terrified and touched Callum simultaneously. She knows about you, about us. She's seen the photo I keep on my desk. They ended up in Central Park, finding a bench overlooking the water. Sarah leaned against Callum's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. Tell me about tomorrow, Sarah said quietly. What happens when we wake up and reality sets in? Tomorrow I have breakfast with Rosie. I tell her the truth about everything. Then we figure out how to get ahead of this story. Callum pressed a kiss to the top of her head. And you stop hiding? Come to breakfast with us. Let Rosie meet you. I don't know if I can do that. Her voice was small, vulnerable. What if she hates me for what I did to her father? Then she hates you, and we work through it. But Sarah, you can't keep making decisions based on worst-case scenarios. He tilted her chin up, making her look at him. Trust me. Trust Rosie. Trust that maybe, just maybe, this could actually work out. She searched his eyes for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay. Breakfast. All of us. Tomorrow. Tomorrow, he agreed, sealing it with a kiss that was softer, more tender. This was a promise, not just passion. They stayed in the park until nearly midnight. Eventually, Callum walked Sarah back to her hotel, different from his, a deliberate choice on her part to maintain some distance, even as they were drawing closer. At the entrance, she turned to face him. Thank you. For what? For not hating me. For giving me a chance to explain. For still being the man I fell in love with. She stood on her toes, kissing him softly. I'll see you tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock? 9 o'clock, he confirmed. Sarah, don't run. Promise me that whatever happens tomorrow, you won't disappear again. I promise. She squeezed his hand. I'm done running, Callum. For better or worse, I'm here. He watched her disappear into the hotel lobby before turning to walk back. His phone buzzed almost immediately with a text from Rosie. Saw you kissing someone in Central Park. Nice work, old man. Callum stared at the message, then at the attached photo, taken from a distance but unmistakably him and Sarah on the bench. How long had Rosie been following them? His phone rang. Rosie, of course. Before you yell at me for stalking you, she started immediately. I wasn't stalking. I was just making sure you were okay. And then I saw you with her. And Dad. She's really alive? How did you know? Callum asked. Because you don't kiss someone like that unless they matter. Like, really matter. And the only person who's ever mattered to you like that is the woman in the photo on your desk. Rosie's voice held excitement rather than accusation. So that's her, right? Sarah Norman? There was no point in lying. Yes, that's her. And she's meeting us for breakfast tomorrow morning. Just the three of us. Silence on the other end, then. Is that why you're walking alone at midnight looking like your whole world just got turned upside down? When did you get so perceptive? I'm 14, Dad. We notice everything. A pause. Are you okay? Like, really okay? Callum stopped walking, leaning against a building. Honestly? I don't know. I'm angry and relieved and terrified and in love all at the same time. It's a lot. Yeah, I bet. Another pause. For what it's worth, she looked at you the same way you look at her photo, like you're the center of her universe. Get some sleep, sweetheart. Tomorrow's going to be intense. Dad? Rosie's voice stopped him. I'm glad she's alive. I know that probably sounds weird, but I'm glad. You deserve to be happy like that. The next morning arrived too quickly. Callum woke to find Rosie already awake and dressed, sitting on the hotel room couch with her sketchbook open but untouched. Couldn't sleep, he asked, moving to start coffee. Slept fine. Just been awake since 5 thinking about everything. She closed the sketchbook. Are you sure about this? Bringing her back into your life? It's a lot of complication, Dad. I'm sure. The certainty surprised him. I know it's complicated, but Rosie, I've spent 15 years living half a life, and yesterday, sitting across from Sarah, I felt alive again. Really alive. That's worth fighting for. Rosie studied him with those too perceptive eyes. What if she leaves again? It was the fear Callum hadn't quite articulated to himself. Then I'll survive it. But I have to believe she won't. I have to trust that she meant it when she said she was done running. At 8:45, Callum's phone buzzed. Sarah. I'm in the lobby. Still okay to come up? He typed back, Room 2847, doors open. Rosie stood, smoothing down her shirt nervously. How do I look? You look perfect. Callum hugged his daughter, feeling her trembling slightly. She's going to love you. The knock came at 9 exactly. Callum opened the door to find Sarah standing there with 2 coffee cups and a bakery box, looking as nervous as Rosie. I brought provisions, she said, holding up the offerings. I didn't know what anyone liked, so I got a variety. I hope that's okay. I can go get something else if... Sarah, Callum gently took the coffee and pastries from her shaking hands. Breathe. It's going to be fine. Rosie stood in the middle of the room, arms crossed defensively, studying Sarah with frank curiosity. For a long moment, the 2 most important women in Callum's life just looked at each other. Sarah spoke first. Hi. I'm Sarah. I guess you already know that. I'm sorry. This is so strange. I've never done this before. Done what? Met your ex-fiancée's daughter? Yeah, I imagine that doesn't come up much, but Rosie's tone was more curious than hostile. You look different than the photo, older, more polished. 15 years will do that. Sarah moved cautiously into the room, maintaining distance. Your father's told me a lot about you, about your art, your intelligence, how you keep him grounded. He tell you how I asked if you're the reason he looks sad even when he's smiling? Rosie's directness made Sarah flinch, but she didn't look away. He did. And for what it's worth, I'm sorry. For causing that sadness, for being the ghost that haunted your father. Sarah's hands twisted together. I made a choice 15 years ago that I thought was protecting him, but I can see now that it caused different kinds of damage. To him, to people who loved him, to you. Rosie considered this. Why'd you come back now? Why not stay hidden? Because I got careless and he saw me, and because I realized I couldn't keep hiding forever. Sarah glanced at Callum, then back to Rosie. And because I never really stopped loving your father, even when I should have. You hurt him. Rosie's voice was quiet but firm. You let him think you were dead. That's messed up. You're absolutely right. It is messed up. Sarah didn't make excuses. And I can't take it back. I can only try to do better going forward. Try to be honest, even when it's hard. Rosie studied Sarah for another long moment, then surprised them both by moving forward and hugging her quickly before stepping back. Okay, I'm willing to give you a chance, but if you hurt him again, I will make your life very difficult. Understood? A startled laugh escaped Sarah. Understood. And for what it's worth, I have no intention of going anywhere. I'm done running. They settled into breakfast with an awkwardness that gradually eased into something more comfortable. Rosie asked questions about Paris, about Sarah's work, about what it was like to live under a false identity. Sarah answered honestly. I've been learning languages, Rosie mentioned casually. Spanish at school, but I've been teaching myself French online. Maybe you could help? The olive branch made Sarah's eyes shine with tears. I'd love that. Callum watched them together, his heart expanding with dangerous hope. This could work. His phone buzzed, shattering the moment. Aaron's name flashed with a message. Trevor Hoffman just published. You need to see this now. Callum opened the article link with dread pooling in his stomach. The headline made his blood run cold. Tech CEO's dead, fiancé alive and working as anonymous consultant, an investigation into deception in the industry. The article laid out everything. Sarah's supposed death, the closed casket funeral, the mysterious founding of S. Norman Consulting 7 years later, financial records connecting the firm to Brennan Technologies, speculation about fraud, conflicts of interest, whether Callum had known all along. We're too late, Sarah whispered, reading over his shoulder. He's already published. Rosie grabbed the phone, scanning the article quickly. This is bad, right? It's not great, Callum admitted, mind racing through implications. Company stock would take a hit. Investors would demand explanations. The media frenzy would be intense. But looking at Sarah, seeing fear and resignation warring in her expression, he made a decision. Or, we make it not bad. We get ahead of it. Tell our story our way before the narrative gets away from us. How do we do that? Sarah's voice shook slightly. We hold a press conference, today, if possible. We tell the truth, all of it. Why you left, what really happened, how we reconnected. We own the story. Callum took her hand, squeezed firmly. Together. That's either brilliant or completely insane, Rosie observed. Probably both, Callum agreed. But it's better than hiding. Sarah looked between Callum and Rosie, seeing determination on both faces. Slowly, she nodded. Okay, we do this, but I need to call Doris first. She deserves to hear this from me. While Sarah stepped into the bedroom to call her sister, Rosie turned to her father. You know this is going to be intense, right? I know. Callum pulled his daughter close. You sure you're okay with this? With me bringing all this chaos into our lives? Dad, our lives have been chaotic since I was born. At least this chaos comes with a chance for you to be actually happy. That's worth something. Through the bedroom door, they could hear Sarah's muffled voice, thick with emotion. Doris, I need you to know something. It's about to be everywhere. Yes, he knows. Yes, we're together. When Sarah emerged 15 minutes later, her eyes were red but clear. Doris is flying in from Chicago. She wants to be here for the press conference, said she's carried this secret long enough. More family support is good, Callum agreed. He was already texting Aaron. Aaron's calling a crisis management team. We'll have a strategy by this afternoon. Press conference scheduled for tomorrow morning. Tomorrow? Sarah's voice pitched higher. That's so soon. The longer we wait, the worse it gets. Tomorrow we control the narrative. Callum moved to her, taking both her hands. I know you're scared, but we do this together. You, me, Doris if she's willing. We stand up there and tell the truth. The next 24 hours were a whirlwind. Crisis management consultants briefed them on strategy. Legal counsel reviewed potential implications. Aaron coordinated with major news outlets. Eleanor flew in from Paris, offering both moral support and her perspective as the person who'd helped orchestrate the original disappearance. Doris arrived that evening, and the reunion between the sisters was emotional. They held each other for long minutes, both crying, both laughing. "I'm so angry at you," Doris said when they finally pulled apart. "You let Mama die believing you were gone. Do you know what that did to me?" "I know," Sarah's voice broke. "I can never make that right, Doris. Never." "Good, it should be." But Doris hugged her again anyway. "I'm still glad you're alive, even if you're the most frustrating human on the planet." That night, unable to sleep, Callum found Sarah on the hotel balcony overlooking the city. She was wrapped in his jacket, staring at the lights below with an unreadable expression. "Second thoughts?" he asked, joining her against the railing. "About 1,000 of them." She leaned into him when he wrapped his arms around her from behind. "This time tomorrow, the whole world will know everything, every mistake, every choice, every moment of pain. It's terrifying." "Then let's make a different memory tonight." Callum turned her to face him, cradling her face in his hands. "Let's remember that before the chaos, before the consequences, there was just us. Two people who loved each other enough to survive impossible odds." The kiss was slow and deep, 15 years of longing pouring into the connection. Callum's hands moved to her hair, gently releasing the pins that held her twists in place. Sarah's fingers worked the buttons of his shirt, both of them needing the confirmation of skin against skin, the reality of each other's presence. They moved inside, closing the balcony door behind them. The room was dimly lit, city lights filtering through gauze curtains, creating an intimate cocoon that felt separate from the world waiting outside. Callum guided Sarah to the bed, his movements deliberate and reverent, as if she were something precious that might shatter if handled carelessly. "I need to tell you something," he murmured against her neck, pressing kisses along the curve that made her shiver. "I never stopped loving you, even when I tried, even when I thought I should, even when I convinced myself I was moving on. You were always there, underneath everything." "I know." Sarah's hands traced the planes of his chest, relearning territory she'd memorized years ago, but which time had changed. His body was more solid now, the lean runner's build she remembered filled out with maturity. New scars marked his skin too, a surgical scar on his shoulder she didn't recognize, evidence of years lived without her. "Because I felt the same way. Every video call, every business discussion, I was really just looking for excuses to be near you, even if you didn't know it was me." He kissed her again, deeper this time, hands learning the changes 15 years had made to her body. She was softer in some places, leaner in others. The curve of her waist felt both familiar and new under his palms. New scars marked her skin, evidence of a life lived in his absence. "Tell me," he whispered, fingers tracing a surgical scar on her abdomen with tender curiosity. "Tell me the story of this one." "Appendicitis 8 years ago," her voice caught with the memory. "I was alone in a Berlin hospital at 3 a.m, terrified, wondering if this was how it would end, not dramatically but stupidly, alone in a foreign city with no one who even knew my real name." She looked up at him, tears gathering. "I almost called you then. Almost broke my cover because I needed you so badly. The nurse asked if there was anyone she should contact, and the only name I wanted to give her was yours." Callum kissed the scar, the gesture tender and full of anguish for all the moments he'd missed, all the times she'd needed him and he hadn't been there. "I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere. Not anymore." "Promise?" The word came out small, vulnerable in a way that reminded him of the young woman who'd been afraid of not being accepted by his world. "I promise." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the tip of her nose. "No more unilateral decisions. No more you protecting me by leaving. We face everything together from now on." They took their time, relearning each other with touches that were both familiar and new. Sarah trembled as Callum's fingers traced the curve of her waist, his palms warm and certain against her ribs. He memorized the way she responded when he kissed the sensitive spot behind her ear, a soft exhalation, her fingers tightening on his shoulders. Some things, it seemed, time hadn't changed, but other things had. She was less tentative now, more sure of what she wanted. Her hands explored his body with a confidence she hadn't possessed at 29, mapping the changes, learning the man he'd become. She traced the surgical scar on his shoulder. "Skiing accident," he explained before she could ask. 3 years ago, Rosie dared me to try a black diamond run. I should have known better." Sarah smiled against his skin. "You always were terrible at backing down from a challenge." "Still am." He rolled them over so she was beneath him, looking up with those warm brown eyes that had haunted his dreams for 15 years. "Case in point, I'm here with you, about to face down the entire business world tomorrow, and I don't care. All I care about is this, us, right now." When they finally came together, it felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. Their bodies remembered the rhythm, the give and take, the way they fit together like puzzle pieces designed specifically for each other. But it was also new, weighted with maturity and understanding that their younger selves hadn't possessed. They knew now what it cost to lose each other, and that knowledge made every touch, every kiss, every moment of connection more precious. Sarah cried as they moved together, tears streaming down her face, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of being held by the one person who'd ever truly seen her. 15 years of loneliness and longing and love that refused to die poured out in those tears. Callum kissed them away, whispering promises against her skin, promises about tomorrow and next week and next year and all the years after that. Promises he intended to keep this time, no matter what the world threw at them. "I love you," she whispered as sensation built between them, as 15 years of distance finally, gloriously closed. "I've loved you every single day, every minute, even when it hurt, even when I thought I'd never see you again." "I know." His voice was rough with emotion, his hands gentle as they cradled her face. "I know because I felt it, in every strategy you sent, in every insight that felt like it came from someone who knew me too well. You were there all along, weren't you? Watching over me." I couldn't help it. Her hands moved to his face, memorizing the feel of him, the reality of him, after so many years of nothing but pixels on a screen. "I tried to stay away. I tried to let you go, but I couldn't. You're the only person who's ever made me feel like I was enough exactly as I am." The words undid something in him. He kissed her with renewed intensity, telling her with his body what words could never fully capture, that she was more than enough, that she'd always been enough, that he'd spent 15 years feeling incomplete without her, and now, finally, he was whole again. When they finally crested together, it was with a synchronicity that felt like destiny, like their bodies had been waiting 15 years to find this rhythm again. Sarah's hands clutched at his shoulders, holding him close as waves of sensation washed through them both. Callum buried his face in her neck, breathing her in, feeling her pulse flutter against his lips as they trembled together in the aftermath. They lay tangled together for long minutes, neither willing to move to break the spell of this perfect moment. The city lights outside painted patterns on the ceiling. The distant sound of traffic provided a gentle soundtrack. And for the first time in 15 years, both of them felt truly at peace. Eventually, Sarah shifted to look at him, her hand coming up to trace the lines on his face. New lines she'd only seen through video screens until now. "Tell me about the gray," she said softly, running her fingers through the silver at his temples. "When did it start?" "About 7 years ago." He caught her hand, brought it to his lips. "Right around the time a mysterious consultant started working with my company. Right around the time I started feeling like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't completely alone anymore." Her eyes filled with tears again. "You felt that?" "I felt something." He shifted so they were face to face, their bodies still entwined. "I told myself I was imagining it, that I was just desperate for connection. But looking back now, I think some part of me always knew it was you. My heart recognized you, even when my mind couldn't accept the impossible." "I wasn't as careful as I thought I was," Sarah admitted. "There were times I almost slipped. Times when you'd say something that made me laugh, and I'd have to mute my microphone because you'd have recognized the sound. Times when you looked so tired and defeated that I wanted to reach through the screen and hold you. Times when I almost ended the call and never came back, because being close to you but not really with you was torture. But you stayed. He pulled her closer, tucking her head under his chin. Why? Because watching you from a distance was better than not seeing you at all. Because helping you build your dreams, even anonymously, gave me purpose. Because... She paused, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. Because I was selfish. I couldn't have you, but I couldn't completely let you go either. I'm glad you were selfish. Callum tilted her face up to his, making her look at him. I'm glad you couldn't let go. Because if you had, we wouldn't be here right now. We wouldn't have tomorrow. We wouldn't have a chance at forever. Do you really think we can have forever? The vulnerability in her voice made his chest ache. After everything? With everything we're about to face? I think, he said slowly, choosing his words carefully, that we've already survived the worst thing that could happen to us. We lost each other for 15 years. We grieved, we suffered, we built separate lives, and despite all of that, despite time and distance and death itself, we found our way back. So yeah, I think we can survive whatever comes next, as long as we do it together. Sarah was quiet for a moment, absorbing his words. Then she smiled. A real smile, not the professional mask she'd been wearing for 15 years. Together, I liked the sound of that. They made love again, slower this time, savoring each touch and kiss and whispered endearment. This wasn't about the desperate need to confirm each other's reality. This was about promise, about choosing to build something new from the ruins of what they'd been, about writing a future together instead of living separately in the past. Afterward, as they lay in the tangle of sheets with the night growing darker outside, Sarah traced idle patterns on Callum's chest. Tell me about tomorrow, she said quietly. What happens when we wake up and this bubble bursts? Tomorrow we stop hiding. Callum's hand moved through her hair, the two-strand twists loose and beautiful around her face. We hold that press conference. We tell the world the truth. And then everything changes, Sarah finished. Your company, my clients, everything we've built. Maybe. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. Or maybe everything finally starts to make sense. Maybe being honest is what we've needed all along. You make it sound simple. It's not simple. He tilted her chin up so she was looking at him. It's going to be messy and complicated and probably painful in ways we can't predict. But Sarah, I'd rather face that with you than spend another day in a life that looks perfect but feels empty. She studied his face in the dim light, searching for doubt or regret. She found only certainty. How did I get so lucky, she whispered, to have you love me like this? To have you willing to risk everything for us? I'm the lucky one, he kissed her softly. I got you back. Against all odds, against death itself, I got you back. Everything else is just details. They talked late into the night, their voices quiet in the darkness. They talked about fears and hopes, about Rosie and what Sarah's reappearance might mean for her, about how to rebuild trust with people they'd deceived. They talked about practical things, where they'd live, how they'd blend their lives, whether Sarah should keep her apartment in Paris or let that part of her life go completely. I think I'm ready to let it go, Sarah said eventually. Paris was where I hid. Chicago is where I want to live. You're sure? That's a big decision. I'm sure. She laced her fingers through his. I've spent 15 years running and hiding. I'm tired, Callum. I want to stop. I want to build a home, a real one, not just a beautiful prison. Then that's what we'll do. He pulled her closer, wrapping himself around her. We'll build a home. Together. As sleep finally began to claim them, Sarah whispered one more thing. Thank you. For what? For not hating me, for forgiving me, for still seeing me as worth fighting for. Always, Callum murmured against her hair. You were always worth fighting for. I just wish I'd fought harder 15 years ago. We weren't ready then, Sarah said drowsily. We are now. Morning light found them still wrapped around each other, neither having moved much during the night. Sarah woke first, taking a moment to simply watch Callum sleep. The lines on his face were softer in rest, his breathing deep and even. She memorized the moment, this brief peace before they faced the storm. When his eyes finally opened and found her watching him, he smiled. "Morning. Morning." She leaned in to kiss him softly, ready to face the world. "With you? Always?" They rose slowly, reluctantly leaving the cocoon of intimacy they'd created. As they dressed and prepared for the press conference that would change everything, they stole touches and glances, building a connection that would have to sustain them through whatever came next. "No matter what happens today," Callum said as they stood at the door, about to step out into the hallway and back into reality, "remember this. Remember us. Remember that we chose each other." "I'll remember," Sarah promised. "How could I forget?" They walked out together, hand in hand, ready to face the truth and all its consequences. The conference room was packed, cameras already rolling when they entered. Callum walked in first, Sarah beside him, their hands linked. Doris and Eleanor sat in the front row. Aaron stood near the side wall. Rosie had wanted to come, but Callum had firmly vetoed that idea. They sat at the table facing the room, microphones positioned in front of them. Callum began with a prepared statement. "Good morning, I'm Callum Brennan, CEO of Brennan Technologies. This is Sarah Norman, founder of S. Norman Consulting. We're here today to address recent news stories about our relationship, both personal and professional." He paused, squeezed Sarah's hand for courage. 15 years ago, Sarah was my fiancée. We were engaged to be married. Then she died, or so I believed. The truth, which I only recently learned, is that Sarah staged her death to escape threats against both her and my company. The room erupted in questions, but Callum held up a hand. "Please let me finish." Sarah took over, her voice shaking initially but growing stronger. "When Callum and I got engaged, we faced significant opposition from investors, not because of anything logical, but because of who I am. I'm a black woman, Callum is white, and 15 years ago, certain powerful people made it very clear that my presence in his life was going to destroy everything he'd worked for." She detailed the threats without naming specific names. Pressure from investors, warnings about funding being pulled, explicit statements that an interracial relationship would be a liability to the company. "I made a choice," Sarah continued. "I chose to remove myself from Callum's life so that he could build the company he deserved without me as an obstacle. I staged my death with help from trusted friends. I let everyone believe I was gone, including my own mother who died 5 years ago, never knowing I was alive." Her voice broke. "That's a mistake I can never fix, a betrayal I can never take back. My sister Doris has carried the burden of my secret for 15 years. And Callum," she looked at him, tears streaming. "Callum grieved for me, built his company in my memory, lived with the pain of my loss, and I let him because I was convinced it was the only way to protect him." Callum took over. 7 years after Sarah's supposed death, I began working with S. Norman Consulting. I didn't know it was her. She'd changed her appearance, her name, her entire identity. For 8 years, she helped shape Brennan Technologies' strategy. And I never knew I was working with the woman I'd never stopped loving. He explained how he'd discovered the truth, the technical glitch that had revealed her scar, the phone call, the meeting in New York where they'd decided together to stop hiding. "We're here today because hiding hasn't served anyone," Callum said firmly. "We're here to tell the truth, accept the consequences, and move forward honestly." Then came the questions, rapid fire and often hostile. "Mr. Brennan, did you know Sarah Norman was alive before last week?" "No, I believed she died 15 years ago until I saw her on a video call." "Miss Norman, do you regret your decision to fake your death?" "Yes and no. I regret the pain I caused, absolutely, but I did what I thought was necessary to protect someone I loved." "Were there romantic feelings between you during your professional relationship?" Sarah and Callum exchanged a look before she answered honestly. "I never stopped loving him. So yes, there were feelings, but we maintained professional boundaries because I was still hiding my identity." The questions continued for over an hour. Some reporters were sympathetic, others openly skeptical. Through it all, Callum and Sarah sat united, hands linked above the table, facing the storm together. Finally, Callum stood. We understand this is difficult to process. It raises questions about judgment, about trust. All we can do is be honest about what happened and commit to transparency going forward." "Thank you." As they filed out through the back exit, Sarah collapsed against Callum. "That was the hardest thing I've ever done." "You were incredible." He held her close, honest and brave and everything you needed to be. Aaron met them in the hallway, his expression grim. "Stock dropped 10% within the first 15 minutes. We're getting calls from investors demanding emergency board meetings. Several of Sarah's consulting clients have already terminated their contracts." "Expected," Callum said, though the news still hit hard. "What's the overall reaction?" "Mixed. Some people are sympathetic. Others think the whole thing is a romantic scandal. The business community is split." Aaron looked between them. "This isn't over. The fallout is just beginning." But Sarah, still wrapped in Callum's arms, managed a smile. "At least it's honest fallout. At least we're facing it together. If someone you loved came back from the dead, would you be able to forgive them for letting you grieve? Or would the betrayal be too deep? Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to see how Callum and Sarah navigate this impossible situation. Chapter 4. The weeks that followed were brutal. Brennan Technologies' stock fluctuated wildly. Several board members called for Callum's resignation. Norman Consulting lost nearly half its client base within days. Through it all, Callum and Sarah faced the storm together. Eleanor provided strategic counsel. Doris handled family communications. Aaron worked overtime to maintain stability at Brennan Technologies. And Rosie, surprisingly, became an unexpected advocate. She started a video blog documenting her perspective. The daughter of a man who'd spent her whole life grieving someone who turned out to be alive. Her honest commentary about complex family situations and forgiveness went viral. "People keep asking me if I'm angry," Rosie said in one video that got particular traction. "And yeah, I'm processing a lot. But I'm also watching my dad actually be happy for the first time I can remember. Sarah made mistakes, huge ones. But she's also trying to make things right now. Isn't that worth something?" 3 weeks after the press conference, Callum stood in his office watching the sunset over Chicago. Sarah came up behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "How bad was the board meeting?" she asked quietly. "Intense, but I still have majority support. Barely." He turned in her arms. She looked tired, worn down by constant scrutiny. "How was your day?" "Lost another client. But I also got a call from a startup that specifically wants to work with me because of my story. Said they value someone who understands sacrifice and difficult choices." A small smile tugged at her mouth. "So mixed bag." "We're still standing," Callum observed. "We're still standing," she agreed. The tide began to shift slowly. Trevor Hoffman published a surprisingly nuanced follow-up piece about the pressures faced by interracial couples in corporate environments. He'd interviewed other people who'd faced similar threats. The conversation evolved from, did they commit fraud, to why was fraud necessary to protect a relationship? It didn't fix everything, but they were building something new from the ruins, something honest and visible and real. 6 months after the press conference, on a Saturday morning when Rosie was at a friend's house, Callum and Sarah went back to the coffee shop where they'd first reconnected. They sat at the same table, looked at each other with eyes that had seen too much pain but were choosing hope anyway. "I've been thinking about something," Callum said, pulling a small box from his pocket. Sarah's eyes widened. "Callum, it's not what you think." "Well, it is, but also not." He opened the box to reveal the engagement ring he'd given her 15 years ago. "I've been carrying this around for 15 years, couldn't bring myself to get rid of it." He took the ring out, held it up to the light. "This represents who we were, young and idealistic, and maybe love didn't conquer everything, but it survived everything. That counts for something." Sarah reached out, touching the ring with trembling fingers. "I left this behind because I thought I was setting you free." "I know." Callum closed the box, put it back in his pocket. "And someday, when we're both ready, when the world has calmed down and we've rebuilt what was broken, I'm going to propose to you again, with a different ring, one that represents who we are now, not who we were." Tears streamed down Sarah's face. "You'd want to marry me? After everything?" "After everything," he confirmed. "But Sarah, I need you to understand something. When I propose again, I need to know you'll trust me. Trust us. That you won't make unilateral decisions. That you'll believe we're stronger together." I will. She leaned across the table, kissing him. I promise, Callum. No more running, no more hiding. Just us facing whatever comes together. They sat in that coffee shop for hours, talking through possibilities. Sarah was considering relocating permanently to Chicago. Callum was working with his board on new corporate governance policies. They were figuring out how to blend their lives properly. 9 months after the press conference, Sarah officially moved to Chicago. She found an apartment in the same building as Callum's penthouse, separate spaces but close enough to build a life together at a pace that felt manageable. Rosie helped her decorate, the two of them developing a genuine friendship built on shared artistic interests and dry humor. Eleanor visited from Paris and pronounced herself satisfied. You're learning to be brave in a different way, she told Sarah. Not the brave of grand gestures, but the brave of showing up every day and doing the hard work. Doris came to Chicago frequently, watching her sister rebuild with a mixture of relief and residual anger that would probably never fully dissipate. But she was there for family dinners, for holidays, for the ordinary moments Sarah had missed for 15 years. Aaron eventually warmed to the situation, seeing how Callum transformed from a man going through motions to someone fully engaged with life. I'm still not sure I forgive her, he told Callum one night, but I can't deny that you're happier now, so I'm willing to give it a chance. Brennan Technologies stabilized. The company actually gained a reputation for transparency and ethical leadership. S. Norman Consulting transformed as well. Sarah shifted her focus to working with smaller companies and startups, particularly those founded by women and people of color facing systemic barriers. One evening, Callum found Sarah and Rosie in the penthouse living room, both bent over a canvas. Sarah was teaching Rosie techniques for oil painting. Your dad never told me you had this much talent, Sarah was saying. This piece is remarkable. He doesn't really get art, Rosie said affectionately. He tries, but he's more of a numbers guy. He is, Sarah agreed with a smile, but he appreciates beauty even if he can't create it. That's its own gift. Watching them together, Callum felt something settle in his chest. This was what he'd been missing. Not just romantic love, but family. The kind built from choice and commitment and the stubborn refusal to give up on each other. Later that night, after Rosie had gone to bed, Callum and Sarah sat on his balcony overlooking the Chicago skyline. I've been thinking about something, Sarah said quietly. About my mother. About the fact that she died never knowing I was alive. Callum took her hand, waiting. I can't fix that. I can't go back and make different choices, but I can honor her memory by living honestly now, by being present for the people who matter. She turned to look at him. I want to visit her grave, with Doris. I want to tell her I'm sorry even if she can't hear me. I'll come with you, Callum offered, if you want me there. I do. She leaned her head on his shoulder. I want you there for everything now. That's the point, isn't it? No more facing things alone. They made the trip the following weekend. Sarah, Doris, Callum, and Rosie. The cemetery was quiet, peaceful. Sarah's mother was buried in a section reserved for family plots, her stone, modest but well-maintained. Sarah Norman, beloved mother and grandmother, born 1948, died 2020, gone but never forgotten. Sarah knelt before the headstone, tears streaming down her face. Hi, Mama. I'm sorry it took me so long to visit. I'm sorry for a lot of things. Her voice broke. You deserved better than what I gave you. You deserved to know I was alive, to meet Callum properly, to be part of my life. Doris knelt beside her sister, taking her hand. She loved you so much, Sarah, even when she thought you were gone. She used to talk about you constantly, your brilliance, your determination, your kind heart. She was proud of you. She shouldn't have been, Sarah whispered. I was a coward. You were human, Callum said, crouching on Sarah's other side. You made an impossible choice in an impossible situation, and your mother, if she was anything like you, would understand that. They stayed at the grave for an hour, Sarah talking to her mother about everything that had happened, about Callum and their reunion, about Rosie, about Paris and the years of hiding, about choosing to live openly now in a way that would have made her mother proud. As winter approached, life settled into a new rhythm. Sarah and Callum navigated the complexities of blending their lives, sometimes gracefully, sometimes with frustration, but always with commitment to working through challenges together. Marie Armstrong, Callum's ex-girlfriend, reached out 10 months after the press conference. She wanted to meet for coffee. Sarah insisted on going with Callum. Marie was gracious, but honest. "I'm not going to pretend I wasn't hurt. I was. Finding out that the man I was dating had never really moved on, that's a lot to process." She looked at Sarah directly. "But I also see how he looks at you. I never got that look. So I guess I'm glad you're alive, even if the timing was terrible for me." "I'm sorry," Sarah said sincerely. "You deserved better than being caught in the middle of our mess." "I did," Marie agreed. "But I'm okay now. Dating someone new, actually. Someone who looks at me the way Callum looks at you. We all deserve that, don't we?" The meeting brought closure Callum hadn't realized he needed. As December approached, bringing the anniversary of 1 year since Callum had first seen Sarah's scar, he began planning. He worked with Aaron and Rosie to coordinate details, prepared to ask a question he'd been waiting months to voice. On the exact anniversary, he told Sarah he wanted to take her somewhere special. "You know I don't like surprises," she protested as he drove them out of Chicago toward the suburbs. "You'll like this one," he promised. He pulled up to a small house, nothing ostentatious, just a well-maintained craftsman-style home with a front porch and a yard full of snow-dusted garden beds. "Whose house is this?" "Ours," Callum said, "if you want it to be." He led her inside, where soft music played and candles flickered. The house was furnished simply but beautifully, with touches that reflected both of them. Art that Rosie had helped select, books that represented their combined interests, a study where Sarah could work. "I know we've been living separately," Callum explained, "and that's been good. But I'm ready for more, Sarah. I'm ready to wake up next to you every morning, ready to build a life with you that's ours." He led her to the master bedroom, where floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a backyard that would be beautiful in spring. And there, on a small table, sat 3 items: the old engagement ring, a new ring he'd had designed specifically for her, and a framed photo of them from the press conference. The moment after they'd finished speaking, when they'd turned to each other with exhaustion and relief and love despite everything. "The old ring represents who we were," Callum began, picking it up. "Young and naive. We couldn't fight the world then. We weren't ready." He set it down, picked up the photo. "This represents the truth we faced together, the consequences we didn't run from, the choice to stand in the light instead of hiding." Finally, he picked up the new ring, white gold with a single perfect diamond, elegant and timeless. "And this represents who we are now, scarred and wiser, and still choosing each other despite knowing exactly how hard it's going to be." He got down on one knee, and Sarah's hands flew to her mouth. "Sarah Norman, I loved you when we were young and everything seemed possible. I loved you when I thought you were dead. I love you now, knowing all your flaws and mistakes and the ways you've grown. Will you marry me? Not the version of us from 15 years ago, but the version standing here right now?" "Yes." The word came out choked with emotion. "Yes, of course, yes. I love you, Callum. I've loved you through death and distance and impossible circumstances. I'll love you through whatever comes next." He slipped the ring on her finger, a perfect fit. Then he stood, pulling her into his arms and kissing her with 15 years of waiting, finally, gloriously over. "There's more," he said when they finally pulled apart. "Look behind you." Sarah turned to find Rosie standing in the doorway, filming on her phone with tears streaming down her face. Behind her, Aaron and his wife Michelle, Eleanor, who'd flown in from Paris, Doris, beaming through her own tears. "You told everyone?" Sarah laughed and cried simultaneously. "Family moment," Rosie said, still filming. "Also, I called dibs on being in the wedding party." "Deal," Sarah agreed. Rosie flew into her arms, and then everyone was hugging and crying and laughing all at once. The wedding took place on a Saturday in late spring, in the backyard of their new home. Cherry blossoms were blooming, creating a canopy of pink and white. Only 30 people attended, family and close friends who'd supported them through everything. Rosie served as Sarah's maid of honor. Aaron was Callum's best man. Doris read a poem their mother used to recite. Eleanor officiated. Sarah wore a simple white dress with her hair loose in the twists Callum loved. Callum wore a dark suit, gray eyes suspiciously bright as he watched his bride walk toward him. There was no traditional aisle. Sarah and Callum walked to the altar together, hand in hand, because that's what they were now, equals facing life as a team. Eleanor began simply, "We're here to celebrate a love that survived death. Not metaphorical death, but actual death, or at least the belief in it. This is a love that endured 15 years of separation, of grief, of growth. It's a love that faced public scrutiny and private anguish and chose itself anyway." Callum went first with his vows. "Sarah, I promise to trust you even when fear tells me not to. I promise to communicate my anger instead of burying it. I promise to let you make mistakes without holding them against you forever. I promise to see you, not the woman I lost, not the woman I thought you were, but the woman you actually are right now. I promise to fall in love with you again every single day, even on the days when that takes work." Sarah's turn. "Callum, I promise to be visible, to let you see my ugly emotions, my failures, my fears. I promise to trust you enough to let you fight your own battles instead of trying to protect you by making choices without you. I promise to stay, even when running seems easier. I promise to honor what we lost while building what we have. I promise to love you not just despite our scars, but because of them, because they prove we survived." They exchanged rings, simple bands engraved with words only they could see. We survived on hers. We chose each other on his. Eleanor pronounced them married, and the gathered crowd erupted in cheers as Callum kissed his wife. The reception was intimate and joyful. Rosie gave a toast that had everyone laughing and crying. "I used to think my family was weird because my mom left and my dad was sad all the time. Now I realize my family is weird because my dad's wife faked her death and came back from the grave. So yeah, we're definitely weird. But we're also real and honest and choosing to love each other despite everything being complicated. And I think that's pretty cool." Aaron toasted to second chances and stubborn hearts. Doris toasted to sisters who drove you crazy but made life worth living. Eleanor toasted to love that refused to die. As the sun set, Callum and Sarah danced together, older, wiser, scarred, but standing. Around them, the people who mattered most celebrated not just a wedding, but a resurrection of hope. "How does it feel?" Callum murmured as they swayed together. "Being Sarah Norman Brennan for real this time?" "Terrifying," she admitted, "and perfect, mostly perfect." "I'll take mostly perfect," he said with a laugh. "We've earned mostly perfect." The years that followed were filled with the ordinary magic of building a life together. Sarah and Callum established the Brennan-Norman Foundation, dedicated to supporting individuals and couples facing discrimination in professional environments. They funded legal support, mentorship programs, and research into systemic barriers. Rosie went to college studying art and social justice. Eleanor continued to visit from Paris. Doris found her own healing in watching her sister finally live openly. Aaron and Callum's friendship deepened. 5 years after their wedding, on a spring afternoon, Sarah told Callum she was pregnant. The news was unexpected. She was 48, and neither had planned on starting over with a baby. But when their daughter was born 9 months later, they named her Hope Eleanor Brennan. Hope for the future they'd fought for, Eleanor for the woman who'd helped make it possible. Rosie, now 24, flew home to meet her baby sister. She held Hope with surprising gentleness. "She's so small," Rosie whispered, "and perfect. Hi, little sister. I'm Rosie. I'm going to teach you to be as weird and wonderful as the rest of us." 10 years after Sarah's return from the dead, on the anniversary of that first video call, they gathered in their backyard for Hope's 5th birthday party. The yard was full of children playing, parents chatting, the ordinary chaos of family life. Eleanor had flown in from Paris. Doris helped coordinate games. Aaron and Michelle's children played with Hope. Rosie, home from New York for the weekend, helped Hope open presents. As the sun began to set, Sarah and Callum found themselves alone on their back porch, watching fireflies emerge in the darkening yard. They held hands, comfortable in the silence of two people who'd learned each other's rhythm so thoroughly that words were often unnecessary. "Do you ever think about the alternate timeline?" Sarah asked eventually. The one where I didn't run? Where we fought those investors together and got married at 29? Callum considered. Sometimes, but I don't think we would have made it. We were too young, too naive. We didn't know how to fight together yet. So you think it happened the way it needed to? No, he said firmly. I think it happened in a way that was painful and traumatic and cost us both dearly. But I also think we've built something stronger because of it. We know what we're fighting for now. We know what we can survive. Sarah turned to look at him in the fading light. Gray had spread through his hair, lines deepened around his eyes, but he was more beautiful to her now than he'd been at 28. This was a man who'd survived grief and betrayal and chosen love anyway. I love you, she said simply. Not despite everything that happened, but inclusive of it, all of it. I love you too, Callum replied. Every version of you, the one who left, the one who hid, the one who came back, the one sitting here right now. All of you. They sat in the gathering darkness surrounded by the life they'd built from ashes, and felt the deep peace of two people who'd finally stopped running and started living. Upstairs, Hope slept with a stuffed elephant Eleanor had brought from Paris. In New York, Rosie texted friends about her crazy but cool family. In heaven or the ether or whatever existed beyond, perhaps Sarah's mother looked down and felt pride in the daughter who'd learned to stop hiding and start being seen. And in that backyard in Chicago, with fireflies dancing and the scent of summer arriving on the breeze, Callum and Sarah Brennan held each other and faced their future with the hard-won certainty that whatever came next, they'd face it together. No more unilateral decisions, no more sacrificing love for fear, no more hiding from the world or each other, just two people who'd loved each other enough to survive death, both literal and metaphorical, choosing each other again and again and again. Forever, this time, really, truly, honestly forever. Callum and Sarah's story proves that love can survive even death and deception when two people choose truth and courage. Have you ever had to choose between protecting someone and being honest with them? What would you do if someone you'd mourned came back into your life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to Dear Love Diaries for more stories about love, loss, and second chances. Tomorrow, I'll share another tale of unexpected romance that will remind you it's never too late for a fresh start. Until then, remember, you are worthy of a love that sees all of you and chooses you anyway. Thank you for being part of our story family.